Here are my credentials. I have the most mastery points on Cassante in the world, and I also hit rank 1 Cassante in the world back in February. So without further ado, let's get started. The format for the tier list is I'm going to explain why it's good or why it's bad first off, and then I'm going to explain the situations it's good in and the situations it's bad in. So starting off in the D tier, we have Sunfire Cape. Now, Sunfire Cape is built for wave clear and to soak damage from 5 different targets. Typically, you would see this item on Ornn or Scion because they're just a meatball. They're sitting in the front line and they're trying to stick on to whoever they can. Now, Cassante doesn't do this. Cassante already has good wave clear, and Cassante isolates one person, which makes this item kind of redundant and anti-synergy with Cassante's entire game plan. Similar with Heartsteel, you are incentivized to build this item early on, and that kind of coincides with what Cassante wants to do, because Cassante wants resistances early on, he doesn't want Heartsteel, which is why this item is pretty bad. Next up is Hollow Radiance. Similar to Sunfire Cape, it just gives low resistances. 40 magic resist for like 2.8 thousand gold is incredibly bad, and you already have good wave clear, so you don't need this. Next up is Fimbulwinter. Now, Fimbulwinter used to be one of Cassante's best items. However, after they nerfed it, it's actually one of his worst, for the sole reason that you don't really have mana issues. Yes, Cassante does struggle with mana a little bit in the early laning phase. However, you don't really need a entire item worth of mana to deal with those issues, because those mana issues pretty much evaporate post level 6. So this item is just not good. It doesn't give good shields, and honestly, I just never build it anymore. If you're running into mana issues, I recommend buying a Sapphire Crystal and then building it into a Frozen Heart later on. Now, Zekes Convergence does get a little bit of credit here. It does have nice synergy with Cassante's ultimate, helps you stick onto people after ulting. However, I feel like this item falls off in the Apex tiers. People will dash out and the active is almost instantly useless, or the enemy will have Swifties and it's just really hard to stick onto people. It does not scale well. The item path is not great. I would just avoid this item if you can. Next up is Warmogs. I believe Warmogs isn't terrible as a 6th item. For example, I don't really build this too much, but for example, if you want to build it as a 5th or a 6th item to complete your build, like let's say if you're building supportive and you're trying to keep your support, or you're trying to keep your ADC alive, you have a hyper carry on your team, you want bigger E shields, this is a nice item to have because it's just a massive health boost, and your E shield scales with health. So if you're trying to keep someone on your team alive, then Warmogs as the last item isn't a terrible resort. For the most part, though, I would avoid this item. Next up is Trailblazer. Trailblazer is pretty good if you are on the back foot. If you have low economy and you have a more of a supportive playstyle, I think it's okay. For the most part, though, it's not that good, and it's kind of overshined by Deadmans Plate. I think the slow resist from Deadmans and the damage is very good. The slow from Trailblazer is nice, don't get me wrong. However, I feel like it suffers the same fate as Zeke's, where it doesn't really scale well into the game. And honestly, I just find difficulty finding value out of this item a lot of the times. It does have its moments, but for the most part, it's not a very consistent and reliable item, which is why it's in C tier. Now, next up is Force of Nature. Now, you might be thinking Force of Nature used to be one of the best magic resist items, and you'd be correct, but nowadays Force of Nature is arguably one of the worst, for the sole reason that it only gives 55 magic resist up front. So if the enemy team has the slightest bit of burst damage, then this item is just extremely useless, because by the time you get the actual passive activated, you're already going to be either half HP or less than half HP. In my experience, this item is very bad, and honestly, the only cases it's good to build in is if the enemy team has lots of burn, like let's say for example they have a Zyra brand as their sole magic damage on the enemy team, and they have Leandries, Blackfire, whatever. If they have multiple burn sources and very low burst, I think this item is okay. But if the enemy team has the slightest bit of burst, just opt for Kaenic or literally anything else. Next up is Unending Despair. Now, Unending Despair is actually quite popular on K'Sante in pro play. It's popular in Korea. I see it built pretty much every game. So why is it this low? Unending Despair is this low because, like the other tank items like Sunfire and Hollow Radiance, it scales with health, and you're incentivized to stand in the middle of 5 people, which is counterintuitive with K'Sante's game plan, where he stacks resistances and he wants to isolate one person. This item is pretty nice for the effective HP. If the enemy team has lots of resist shred or whatever, it gives you a nice little chunk of health. But honestly, that little chunk of health is just not worth it after the nerfs. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I would just avoid this item altogether. It's not that good, and I feel like 99 times out of 100, it's just going to be bait. So just avoid it. I pretty much never build it anymore, and I do not recommend it. The only cases it's good in is if the enemy team has lots of melee champions, either 3 or more, or if the enemy team, if the enemy team has no anti-heal. Those are the conditions that I would build this in, but for the most part, just avoid it. Next up is B tier, and starting off in the B tier, we have Locket. Now, Locket is really nice into a dive composition where the enemy team is just fully focused on diving you and your team. It's an upfront big shield that decays very fast, so if you're against someone like a Karthus, for example, and you time it right as Karthus drops, and your entire team is near you as you activate it, it blocks easily 1,500 damage, which is why I really, really like this item. It's really good for counter dive. However, I would not build it every game. There are some cases where you have a lot of gold and you need to play a little bit more, or you need items with more value. Similar to Trailblazer and Zekes, it's a support item, so it doesn't scale amazingly well, but this is one of the better support items, and I would consider building it into an into a dive composition where the enemy team's sole focus is to get on you and your team very fast and deal damage. Next up is Abyssal Mask. Now, Abyssal Mask is pretty good. The only downside is it gives low magic resist, and K'Sante doesn't deal any magic damage, so it doesn't benefit you in any way, honestly. But the reason it's in B tier is it's a very good conditional buy. So for example, if you have 2 magic damage carries on your team and they're both very fed, this is a amazing item to build because you're just increasing their damage by 12%. It's amazing to have. But yeah, it's a nice little support item. It's nice and cheap, has a nice build path. No complaints, but definitely you don't want to build this every game. Moving on to Visage. Visage is at the top of B tier for the sole reason that by itself, it's not really a great item. You have to build it in pair with other items or champions. Like if you are with a enchanter on your team, Visage would easily get bumped up to an A tier. But by itself, Visage is in B tier. I see it paired with Unending quite a bit. I think that's fine, but for the most part, I just don't like the synergy because it gives very low resistances. And if the enemy team has lots of ranged, then you're not really guaranteed to get a good drain. It's just not what you want, honestly, and I would opt for only building Visage if you have an enchanter on your team. But for the most part, by itself, Visage is not great because it gives low magic resist. So if the enemy team has a fed Kassadin, for example, you're much better off just building a Kaenic or something else. But yeah, Visage is a nice item in pair with other conditions, but by itself, it's not that great. Moving on to the A tier, we have Frozen Heart. Now, Frozen Heart is really nice. It gives you a nice chunk of armor. It gives you a nice chunk of ability haste. It's nice and cheap. And it counters auto attackers quite a bit. If the enemy team has lots of auto attackers, this is great to have. Just slows down their ability to do what they want to do. So yeah, this is a nice item. No complaints. No downsides. I would avoid building this if the enemy team just doesn't auto attack, because then the item doesn't do anything. Pretty self-explanatory. It also doesn't give health, so just keep that in mind. Moving on to Randuin's Omen. Randuin's Omen is nice for the slow active. I really like it. And it's also very good for countering 2 or more critical strike champions on the enemy team. Sometimes I'll build it even if there's only 1 critical strike damage on the enemy team. Like if they have a very fed Jinx ADC, then it's a nice item to have. It slows down her damage quite a bit on you, and yeah, it's nice armor, nice health, good active, slow. I really like this item. However, I wouldn't build it every game just because it's hard to get value from the passive in a game where there's no enemy team or no enemy damage that critically strikes. Now, next up is Knight's Vow. I feel like Knight's Vow is one of the most underrated items on K'Sante for the sole reason that after 30 minutes, K'Sante pretty much becomes a support. Building more resistances after 30 minutes starts to be kind of redundant, because if the enemy team has Armor Shred, like Cleaver, Bloodletters, Void Staff, LDR, Rumble E, Jarvan passive, Jarvan Q, Briar, there's so many forms of Armor Shred in the game, and once you get to 30 minutes, you're going to be team fighting, which means you're going to be taking damage. So you're going to be taking 5 damage, 5 sources of damage, and the likelihood of you getting your resistances shredded up into bits is very likely. Now, if the enemy team doesn't have resistances or resistance shred, then I believe that building normal full tank is fine. But Knight's Vow is where you can counter this idea. If the enemy team has Bloodletters, if they have Cleaver, this item doesn't give you lots of resists. It's a nice peel tool to keep one of your carries alive. And not only does it keep your carry alive, but it heals you in the process as well for the percentage of damage that they deal. Which means this item is very strong if you have a fed teammate that is able to dish out a lot of damage and your just sole purpose is to keep them alive. I think this item is really good for doing that. Thornmail is next up. It's pretty self-explanatory. This item is really nice for not only wave clear, but just countering auto attacker champions in general. It's really good for champions like Olaf or Fiora, where they pretty much rely on auto attacks and healing for their champion to be sufficient. They can't not auto attack you because that's what their damage revolves around. So it's very cheap. The build path is really nice. It's a huge chunk of resists. I really like Thornmail. Solid item. Next up is Gauntlet. Now, I would put Gauntlet in S tier, but I would say for the Apex tiers, I'm going to bump it down to A tier. And reason being is Gauntlet is easily countered. If the enemy you're hitting has a dash, like Camille E, or the enemy has Phase Rush with the 75% slow resist, it is very easily countered. Gauntlet doesn't actually give you that many resists, and the build path is not as good as you might think it is. However, Gauntlet in lower elos is very strong because it helps you stick on to people and helps you kill them, set up your combos. It's very strong. However, in higher elo, in my experience, I think Gauntlet is just not good because it's harder to actually stick on to people. It's harder to actually stay on top of them if they already have a dash. You kind of just have to accept the fact you're not going to be able to be on top of them and you're going to have to disengage. Which leads me into my next item, Deadmans. Deadmans is actually really nice for being able to impact the map and being able to move around and do stuff pretty much, because the bonus movement speed is really nice and the slow resist helps you stay mobile within a team fight. I've really been liking this item recently, and I think it's really nice to have if you wish to impact your games more. Straight and forward. S tier is Kaenic and Jak'sho. Pretty straightforward. These items you can pretty much build in almost any game, pretty much. If the enemy team has the slightest bit of magic resist, you can just build Kaenic, and you're instantly just nullifying any damage that's magic that will come towards you. But if the enemy team has a huge magic damage threat, this nullifies them completely. If they only have a small magic damage threat, you can opt for Spirit Visage or Abyssal Mask, but for the most part, Kaenic and Jak'sho are the best tank items in the game for K'Sante. They have amazing synergy, and you can pretty much build them in any game whatsoever. The only times I wouldn't build Kaenic and Jak'sho are pretty much if the enemy team has very, very little magic resist, you don't really need Kaenic because Kaenic is like a huge nullifier of magic damage. So if the enemy team has low magic damage, then you don't really need this huge answer for it. And Jak'sho, the only time I wouldn't build it is if the enemy team has an insane amount of resistance shreds. Like, I'm talking Cleaver, Bloodletter, Briar Q, Void Staff, LDR, Crypt Bloom, 2 Cleavers, bunch of true damage. Then all this flat resistances don't really do you anything. You want to opt for a more either a more supportive build, or you want to opt for some more effective HP that Visage can provide. But for the most part, these two items are really good, and you can build them in pretty much every game. If you're wondering what you can build in pretty much every game, you can pretty much just go Gauntlet, Kaenic, Jak'sho. If the enemy team has low magic damage, like let's say you're against a double AD topside, you can go Gauntlet, Jak'sho, Kaenic. I would start off by building 2 Chain Vests first, and then finish Gauntlet, and then finish Jak'sho. And as a 4th, 5th item, if you have a very fed ADC, you can just opt in for Knight's Vow. This is a nice core build to have. But for the most part, you can just build these 3 core items pretty much every single game, and you will be in a good spot. If you have any questions, let me know. This is the file tier list. Have a great day.